From a military perspective, we have ended the presence of Daesh in Iraq, and Iraqis have the right to celebrate the day of victory over Daesh. So I am waiting for the final reports in order to declare the day of victory over Daesh.
Many in Iraq had hoped Saddam Hussein's fall in 2003 would mean positive change. But 15 years later, the country is still in a fragile state. It's been ravaged by war, a refugee crisis, sectarian strife, and of course, Daesh. In 2014, the terror group controlled much of Iraq's northwest, even taking the major city of Mosul. Now, Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi says Daesh is almost defeated. Iraqi forces have launched a final operation to clear their remaining hideouts from the desert. But the country is still unstable. Despite holding elections, governing institutions remain weak. Corruption and poverty are still rampant. And a dispute with the Kurdish regional government still threatens to erupt. Well, to discuss all of this and more from Baghdad, we are joined now by Iraq's Vice President, Allawi. He's also served as the country's Prime Minister and President of the Iraqi Governing Council that came to power after the US invasion in 2003. Sir, it's a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers again. Iraqi forces have announced they're launching this major operation in the desert, on the western desert near the border with Syria. They want to flush out Daesh. Is this going to be the final battle with Daesh? After this, is Daesh going to be defeated in your country?
It depends what you mean by the final battle. If it's the military battle, I guess it should be one of the final military battles. But we are more interested in winning the war rather than the battles. And we are more interested in winning the peace, not only the war against extremism and ISIS. So we need really to be careful not to have the same environment prevails, which is hospitable and in favor of radicalism and extremism. This is what I think is peace, and this is what I think is winning the war.
Given that atrocities have been documented in the fight against Daesh in this military battle, especially with regards to the fight for Mosul, are you afraid that a version of Daesh or something even worse will rise up again and history will repeat itself?
Absolutely, absolutely. This is what we are frightened of. We know for sure that there are still sleeping cells here and there. And it depends, these sleeping cells could flourish, could expand, could get bigger if the environment, social, political, and economical environment is not adjusted to become non-hospitable to the, hostile to the extreme forces and hostile to terrorism. We see that there are now, we are talking about hundreds of thousands of displaced people are still displaced. Some people are not allowed to return to their homes, not only in Mosul, but elsewhere in the belt of Baghdad and the Ala province and elsewhere. Sectarianism still prevails, and we think and believe, and I definitely think and believe that if we don't adjust the environment, this environment, and make it, and adjust the political process to become an inclusive political process, then there is a great risk that ISIS would return to us in probably a different form, a more radical form, a more vicious form, as we have ended Al-Qaeda before, and Daesh came after Al-Qaeda. My fear is if we don't win the peace in Iraq and in the region, then it is very likely that extremism would rise again in this part of the world.
At the beginning of 2016, I asked you if Iraq is now a client state of Iran, and you said you were worried because it feels as if it's becoming one. So 22 months on, let me ask you directly, is Iraq now a client state of Iran?
I wouldn't say client, but I think and believe and know that the influence of Iran is too great in Iraq still. It's too great in Iraq, and if the trend continues as is, then unfortunately will become dominated completely by neighboring countries, of course, most importantly Iran. That's why I believe that Iraq needs to rise in a unified way. We need to have an inclusive political process. We need to get out and away of sectarianism. And we need to have the arms all within the state of Iraq, within the army, and with the security, official security instruments. This will lead ultimately changing Iraq into a kind of a citizenship state, a state that everybody has the equal rights in this country, every Iraqi, each Iraqi. This is the only way really to combat terrorism and to combat extremism. Without this, we will be a client probably to a lot of countries, unfortunately. But definitely Iran still has a very major say in Iraq and the issues of Iraq, not only Iraq, but rather the region also.
Right. Yeah.
And this can pose a grave danger for this country.
Don't you have some sympathy for Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, given that he has been accused of being a puppet of Iran? You were accused many years ago during the US occupation of being a puppet of the US. Now, from his perspective, perhaps just like from your perspective back then, there's a power that you need and you have favorable policies towards that you need in order to stabilize your country. So maybe from his perspective as Prime Minister, he just needs the Iranians, just like you needed the Americans, to help put out fires in your country, no more, no less.
I did not need the Americans. I was against the war. I was against the occupation. I was all for sovereign Iraq. And this is all present in our statements before the war and after the war, and in the formation of the Governing Council. I never was a puppet to Iran. I never was elected as a prime minister by America. In fact, the Americans wanted me to become the Minister of Defense. But I told them, this is not your business, it's the business of the Governing Council. And the Governing Council should elect the Prime Minister, the President, and the ministers in Iraq.
Okay.
So I am not a puppet. The Iraqis sees me as not a client for anyone. And in fact, I enjoy a very good reputation inside and outside Iraq. When I talk about Iran, I don't say that it is necessary for stabilizing the country. It is dominating the decision-making process in Iraq. And this is the danger. In 2010, I won the elections. But yet Iran refused to acknowledge this. And they decided to confiscate the will of the Iraqi people and choosing another prime minister. And this is what happened exactly. So really we are talking about who is going to confiscate the will of the Iraqi people, who is going to confiscate the final political decision, the sovereign political decision of the Iraqis. This is what I stand for.
Understood.
This is what I believe in. And really, America, although occupied Iraq, but they ultimately gave up to the Governing Council, and they gave the power to the Governing Council to elect the government that the Governing Council sees fit and can run the country. And the Governing Council unanimously elected me as the Prime Minister, elected the President of Iraq then, and also suggested the ministers, and I picked some of the ones who were suggested as ministers to fill the various portfolios. So really there is no comparison here.
Okay.
And I am not accusing the Abadi as a puppet to Iran.
Certainly, that's a strong defense.
Let me just finish this.
Certainly.
I am not accusing Abadi as being a puppet to Iran, but I think Abadi is not managing well the balancing factor where we have to gain and continue a friendship with Iran and Turkey and the other neighboring countries, and between the Iraqi sovereign decisions, political decisions, as where Iraq is going, where Iraq should be heading, and how we can achieve. And if we take the most recent example of this, we see Qasem Soleimani in Kirkuk and regaining Kirkuk to the government of Iraq. It's not acceptable. We don't have a lack or a deficiency in leaders and military leaders and military army. But this was something which is unacceptable from our point of view in Iraq, as the war itself and as the occupation was not acceptable to us.
Right. Let me ask you.
This is well documented, by the way.
Okay.
Even in Turkey, with the Turkish government, this is well documented.
Okay, fair enough. I want to ask you about the north. We are running out of time, so this will be my final question to you. But we've seen the Iraqi government very staunchly defend its sovereignty. It's had a lot of allies in putting down the aspirations of those who had the referendum, the KRG referendum. So they pushed back quite vehemently. Was it the right thing to do, or will it just defer the problem to later on, given that the Iraqi army went in with some tanks, the Iraqi government seized some key parts of Kirkuk, it had some help from Iran? Is the problem just being kicked down the road for later on when it might be bigger?
No, it's not some help. It is really an issue that should be dealt by Iraqis with Iraqis. The Kurdish population is part of the Iraqi society, and the sovereignty of the government of Iraq should be on all its lands, from Zakho to Fao in the south, from the east and west. and I think there was some, the government has right to regain the control over all Iraq, and this is important. But it should have been done in a different way, and it still has to be done in a different way. We have to embrace the Kurdistan region and the Kurdish people into our overall Iraq, and have them as part and parcel of the Iraqi society. Whether we like it or not, they have been part of the Iraqi society. There are some who have aspirations. This is there is no wrong thing in doing so. But to preserve the unity of Iraq is very sacred, very important. And this is what the government tried to achieve. But unfortunately, it didn't give Mr. Barzani, a decent way out of this mess. Now, my fear really, if we don't rectify the issue with the Kurds and get them involved more within the political process in Iraq, my fear is that Kurdistan will become a haven, a safe haven for extremists and those who are against the political process. And we don't want anybody to harbor any grudge against the political process or against the unity of Iraq. And this is what we should be looking at and doing with our friends and the brothers, the Kurds, without interferences and the statements coming from left and right and center. This is unacceptable. It's unacceptable that any country, whether Iran or Turkey or Saudi Arabia or anybody else around Iraq, interfere in Iraqi matters. I told the Turkish government that we need to resolve the issue of the presence of the Turkish army inside Iraq by assuring Turkey that we are not going to allow Iraq to be used against Turkey, and secondly, by getting Turkey to agree that the Iraqis should make the decision whether their units, army units, should stay or remain or not remain in Iraq. And we agreed on this with the Prime Minister of Turkey when he visited Baghdad. And I also discussed this with ex-President Gül when I saw him in Amman on the fringes of the security meeting in Amman. So I think we should deal inclusively to maintain the inclusivity of the political process, where each and every Iraqi should be respected, regardless, except those who are extremes and who are terrorists. That's all.
Right.
Iraq's Otherwise, we should incorporate everybody in an inclusive way.
Okay, unfortunately, I've got to move on. Iraq's Vice President Iyad Allawi. Sir, it's been a pleasure having you on the Newsmakers again. Thank you very much for joining us.